Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to be going over one of AccordionUI's probably lesser known and lesser used components, but one that I think is a super cool addition to any website, and that is the accordion. If you're not too familiar with what an accordion is, it's pretty much just sort of a vertical looking thing where if you click on one of the tabs, it sort of expands vertically to display some information. You've probably seen these on sites where they have FAQs and stuff like that, and you'll see here I can pretty much expand and collapse any of these accordions as I want. Under the hood, this component uses another component called expansion panels. The expansion panel component is used in a couple of different components, I believe, but funnily enough, if you were to click on the expansion panels component in MUI to look at the documentation, it actually just redirects to accordion. So the developers might be trying to push it in one sort of direction where accordion is more used when it comes to anything that requires expansion panels, but I found that pretty cool. Now, this component has a lot of different variants, and we're going to quickly go over all the variants. Then we're going to look inside of the code to sort of see how it works. It's a pretty simple component, actually, once you get the hang of it. So you'll see here we have our simple accordion. And by the way, before I go further into this, as I always say, if you find value in this video, please consider liking, subscribing, leaving a comment. I can't tell you how much it helps with the channel. These videos have been getting out there to so many people because you guys have been sort of liking and commenting, and it really helps with the YouTube algorithm. It really gets more eyes on these videos, and I honestly love interacting with you guys, seeing your feedback, seeing your comments. I've been trying to take everyone's feedback. I even switched my monitor to a smaller monitor after all the font size comments I've been getting. So I really hope it makes the videos a lot more enjoyable, a lot easier to learn from, and I honestly just love reading all your comments, even if I can't reply to every single one of them, and interacting with you guys. So thank you again for making this such an enjoyable thing to do every weekend when I have the time. So yeah, going back into it, that's what a simple accordion is. Essentially, you sort of click it, it'll expand some details. You can click the other one, it'll expand some details. Then you have our controlled accordion. The main difference here is that you can have, for example, if I were to open one accordion and then I were to open another accordion, you'll see here that the first one will close. And another cool difference to notice here is that there is a description for every accordion before we actually open it and get to the nitty-gritty details. Customizable accordions, what MUI is trying to show in these examples is essentially just how you can customize the stylings. You'll see here when I expand and collapse these accordions, the style is a lot different. In my opinion, these ones sort of look cool, but I really like how this one adds a little spacing between things. And you can see the text is a bit different as well. The edges are a bit bordered, and the div in between the two, or the border in between these accordions, I find to be a lot cooler. Then you get into the more complex different examples. For example, the additional actions accordions, where they show you an example where you can add, for example, a checkbox here. And then you get to the super complex one, where they have a whole bunch of stuff going on. You have an accordion where when you expand it, you're able to, for example, get rid of some multi-select chips. You have a vertical divider with some more details, going to learn more. And then you also have an accordion action bar, which is sort of similar to the way cards work, if you remember. And we'll get into that in just a second, where you could, for example, have actions and buttons that can do different things. In this example, cancel and save, if you're editing the state of the specific accordion. Now, if we scroll down to the bottom to look at the API, you'll see that the API recommends 4 different components. And this is very similar to the card component, in the sense that if you look at every single card, there's a whole bunch of specific card components that goes into it. If you remember from the card video, there is, for example, card, which is what you wrap your entire card in, card action area, card actions, card content, card header, card meter. There's a bunch of them, and accordion is sort of similar in the sense that they sort of break the components down into AccordionActions, AccordionDetails, and AccordionSummary. The majority of what we're going to be used are these accordions and the AccordionDetails. The AccordionSummary is pretty much what controls, for example, I believe these summaries over here. And then finally, the AccordionActions is used in a component like this. And we'll jump into this code in just a second, where you want to have buttons that do different actions at the end of the accordion. And the benefit of using, obviously you can style your accordions to sort of do all of this without using their custom components, but the benefit of using these custom components is that all of the stylings, all of these sort of actions and props are already thought out by Material UI, and I think it's a really cool touch. And before we jump into the code, I also want to show you guys this really cool little tidbit that they have here, where they talk a bit about the Accordion's performance. And what this essentially says is, if you're familiar with how React renders, what it does is whenever a component state changes, it will update the React DOM to sort of add that HTML back into it. And it's a really efficient method of sort of changing the state of your page without having to re-render the entire page. Now, when it comes to these accordions, what it will do by default is everything that is nested inside of these accordions. So, for example, the details that are inside of it will by default be rendered inside of the DOM, even if the accordion is collapsed. So, and the reason this is really good is, number one, for performance. Every time someone expands and collapses this, you're not updating the DOM. And another thing, especially for SEO, if you're building a site and you eventually want it to get recognized on Google and sort of rank on Google, this is really good for SEO, because the way Google's web crawler works is it will look at your page's HTML, and it will look at all the keywords and everything that's being used in there, and it will factor that in when it ranks your website, and it determines which keywords your website should rank in. And if you have some really important information and really good keywords that you want to rank on Google, but it's hidden in the collapse, the good part about this is even if when the Google crawler isn't going to expand and collapse every single one of these accordions, but because this text and everything is still rendered in the DOM, the crawler will still be able to see that in HTML, and it'll still be able to take that into account when factoring your your Google rankings. And I find that to be a really nice touch done by Material UI. I think it's extremely useful. It's something you can just tell that if Material UI's thought of this, there has to be all these other little details that Material UI must have thought of when it comes to making it. And that's really why I love Material UI as a package, because they think of these little things and they think of real world applications like this. If your accordions are rendering some really heavy stuff and you have a lot of different accordion tabs, and every single one of them renders a ton of stuff, and at that point it would get really inefficient to show it, then they have a specific prop where you can turn off this default setting of having everything inside of it rendering into the DOM. But otherwise, I highly recommend sort of not messing with it and just keeping the default behavior. Now, let's look at some of the specific code. And like I said earlier, you'll see that the code for Accordion is actually extremely simple once you get the hang of it and once you understand what's going on. So let's look at the simplest example here. When we go down, we'll see here that we have 3 accordions here. Number 1 is just a basic one, and so is number 2, where it just opens up and shows some details. And then number 3 is one that is disabled and you can't collapse. So you'll see here, if we go into the code, we will have one, the important thing and the important difference to notice between this and the actual card component is that every single one of these sort of drop downs is an accordion in itself. It's not like you make one big accordion component and nest everything inside. Every single one of these is an accordion. So for example, our first accordion, which is right here, you can see here that in our accordion, we have an AccordionSummary, which we can then add typography to show what we want to display on the accordion. So for example, accordion 1, you see here, that is what is being passed into the AccordionSummary. And then we wrap another typography within AccordionDetails, and that is essentially what gets shown when you expand the accordion. And it's pretty much just as simple as that. You can customize it, for example, to have an expand icon. So for example, if you pass in the expand icon prop, then you can pass in a Material UI icon that will show up there. And the cool thing about using the expand more icon is that Material UI automatically for the accordion summary will programmatically sort of, if you see here when I click this, the expand more icon rotates just like that. So any icon you put, I believe, will rotate as well, and it's a really cool touch by Material UI so that it sort of it's a lot better of a user experience when the user can see the expand more icons sort of as up or as down to denote whether or not the accordion is expanded or not. And that's all there really is to the basic accordion. The second accordion, the exact same thing. You have your AccordionSummary, you have your typography, and then you have your details. And then the third one, you can see the only difference is for the accordion, they're passing in the disabled prop, and that disabled prop will make it so that no one is able to click on it and expand it. And you'll see they didn't even bother passing in AccordionDetails into this last one because it's not going to be able to open. Now let's look at the controlled accordion. It might be a bit more complex because we're dealing with state. The real reason we have to deal with state for this component is because we only want one of the accordions expanded at any given time. And when we only want one of these accordions expanded at any given time, because each accordion is its own sort of component, we have to use state to keep track of whether or not that specific accordion is open or not. So if we scroll down, you can see that it's almost the exact same. So we can see here they have the accordion with the AccordionSummary. Now the way they add these cool little description things to the AccordionSummary is they have the title here. They add one typography and they give it the class name of heading, which they give it the general settings, which is what's being passed in here. And then the next thing, they add their own custom class called secondary heading, and they add that. And if we scroll up and we look at the styles, you'll see here that they don't actually pass in a specific style. Oh, sorry. They pass in a specific style for heading, which pretty much what it will do is it will set the font size, set the flex spaces, and then for the secondary heading, because of this flex spaces, it will space out so that the secondary text is actually moved further to the right. And if you're not too familiar with Flexbox, this is just sort of a flex trick that they're doing here to make sure that this takes up around 30% of this, 33% of the space, and then the next thing that will come will take up another 33% of the space. And that is how they are spacing out sort of this. And also, you'll see here that they're setting the text color to the secondary text to be a bit more faded, so it's like a description and doesn't take up as much attention as the header. Now you will also see here everything else is pretty much the same when it comes to the accordion details. Now the big thing to note here is for every single one of these accordions, you'll see here they have set a state here, and that state is called expanded, and this is defaulted to false, but you'll see here when they change the state, what they are essentially doing is they're not setting it to true or false. It might on default be false, but what they're setting it is they're setting it to the panel that they want to be expanded. And you'll see here in accordion, expanded is equal. So whether or not this accordion prop, this expanded prop within accordion will be true or false or not, is dependent on the state variable equaling the text, the string, panel 1. And you'll see on change will be triggered whenever I actually click either the area of the accordion or the button of the accordion. That will trigger this on change that will set our expanded state to say panel 1. And pretty much that is how they are controlling the state. You'll see here that when they take in the handle change, they're taking in panel, and then they take in event and is expanded. And the important thing to note here is that event and is expanded are actually coming from the accordion component itself. So panel is going to be whatever we pass into this handle change. So in this case, it would be panel 1. And event we're not going to be using. That is a default React event listener prop that gets passed in through a function whenever you have something like on change. But is expanded is coming from accordion, and that is what will give us whether or not we are closing an accordion or opening accordion. And we use that variable to then say whether or not, so for example, if we are opening the accordion, then we want to set expanded equal to that accordion's name. If not, we want to just set expanded equal to false. That way none of the accordions will be open. And I have a little, so I pretty much just forked this codesandbox example here. And if we go ahead and come in here and we console.log what panel is in this handle change, and console.log is expanded in this handle change, this will pretty much give us a clear idea of what's happening. So for example, I'm going to click on panel 1, and you'll see here that panel 1 is what is getting passed in here. Whoops. And true is getting passed in through is expanded from the accordion component itself. and that means we are trying to open it. But if I were to click panel 1 again, you see panel 1 doesn't change, but this is expanded gets set to false, and therefore we set our expanded state to false, and that makes it so that none of these accordions are open, because whether or not they are expanded depends on expanded being equal to their sort of ID, their panel 1, panel 2, etc., etc. If I were to open, so let's clear the console here. If I were to open, if I were to open panel 1 again, and then I were to try and open panel 2 or panel 3, you'll see that panel 3 is now there, and expanded is still true because we are expanding one of these panels. And this is probably the most complex logic that you sort of have to wrap your mind around when it comes to accordion, just using it in the basic sense. But once you understand that, the accordion is a pretty basic component. And if I were to, for example, wanted to add another accordion, I could just copy this code. Let's paste it again down here. So past panel number 4. Let's call this panel number 5. On change, we're going to set that to panel number 5. We don't really need to worry about the area or anything like that. That's more for accessibilities and stuff like that. And then we can say, like, this is my custom panel 5, for example. And you'll see here, there you go. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is this code is pretty easy. It's pretty easy to get this code messy. So if you really wanted to, you could, if your data, the data is sort of going to be the same throughout all of this, you can find a way to sort of programmatically create these accordions. And I'm going to show you how to do that really quick here. So I'm going to create, let's say, for example, I have data and I know my data is going to be in a very specific format. Well, each one of these every single entry in data is going to represent a different accordion. So let's say panel 1, and we're going to go ahead and let's say the ID of panel 1 is going to be, in fact, we can even just make this a list of maps. So then for our first panel, we can have, for example, ID is going to be equal to panel 1. And let's say summary, let's say heading for the summary. So heading, let's say this, let's say panel 1 or something, and then we can say like secondary heading. We can say this is my first panel, or this is panel 1, and then in the description we can add whatever text we want in the description. So let's just copy and paste whatever we have in here. Oops, let's it looks like it has a quote somewhere in here, so we're just gonna YOLO. Okay, cool. And then what I could do here is I can take a bunch of these and just make this one panel 2. So this is more often or not, if you're getting data from some sort of CMS in your backend, for example, what you will be passing in. Details. Is it details or description? Yep, details. Okay, cool. And let's also add that over here. And let's make this like something different, just some random text to show you guys. So more often or not, if you're getting data from your CMS or any sort of backend, you're probably going to have the data structured like this for the accordion, and you're not going to be, redundantly making 5 different accordions in your component. So now what we can do here is I can say data.map, and I can say accordion. Oops. And pretty much what we're going to do in here now is I can go ahead and in here destructure. So const, I can say ID heading, secondary heading, details. We can destructure from each accordion. And then I can go ahead and return all of this stuff inside of there and programmatically change all the data in here to the data we've pulled out. So let's go ahead and do that. So expanded will be whether it's equal to ID. Handle on change, we're just going to, we don't have to add brackets around there. Handle on change, we're just going to set this to ID, because that is where the ID is being stored in that variable. Then over here, we want to change this text to be our heading variable. Then over here, we can change this to be secondary heading. And then finally over here, let's go ahead and change this to be whatever is in our details. All right, let's see if that works. And let's try and refresh here. Okay, there we go. Oh yeah, since we're using map, every single one of these has to have a key. So we can just say key is equal to ID here to get rid of that console error. And you'll see here that we have, let's see, if I were to go ahead and refresh, there we go. We have our two panels, and that is how we make this. Now, this sort of idea of programmatically displaying things instead of having them like they do in the Material UI documentation is really common when it comes to Material UI components, especially stuff where there's a variable amount of usage for each component. So I highly recommend getting yourself familiar with this sort of way of doing it. What I like to do when I'm developing is, first things first, I develop the front end, and when I do that for the front end, I'll create a mock data file and pass all this stuff in on the mock data. That way, when I get my actual data from the back end, whether it comes from Redux Saga or wherever, I can simply replace this data with the backend object data, and I never have to touch or change the front end code. So I find it to be a really cool way to code it as well. And if you're interested in learning how to do that with an example from getting real data from somewhere, you can see my Pokedex series from the Material UI series. That's exactly what I did there. I started off with mock data, I built the front end out, then I switched the mock data out with the real data, and it was almost seamless. But yeah, hopefully that gives you guys a good idea of typography. I'm going to put this specific code sandbox link in the description of this video so you can check it out if that's something you're interested in doing. But like I said, if you found value in this video, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment, or liking. I love hearing your feedback. I can't tell you how much it helps with the YouTube algorithm, and it really helps get these videos out there. So thank you again for all your kind words, and I hope everyone's staying safe, and I'll see you guys next week.